first thing I'm going to say is I've changed the title. The title was what I've learned so far, and I've taken that out. And you'll see why. But it's a lot of, there's very limited research on the consequences of these regulated markets because they have not been in place for very long, and a lot of the effects that we would expect will take time to sort of materialize and so on. So I'll have something on it, but not that much. So the first thing I want to do is just quickly say, this is from a study that I did together with Nat and a group of primarily UK-based researchers, where we had a structured decision-making process to try and understand what it is that matters to drug policy and what that implies for how we should regulate alcohol and cannabis. These are the results for cannabis. So we had 17 researchers, we had criminologists, there were some psychiatrists, economists, and a broad variety, and 2 facilitators. And then we tried to find 27 criteria that, here's Steve Rawls, he was also part of the study, by the way. What we tried to do is to find 27 things that we care about that matter to how we evaluate drug policy. Things like reduced use among young people, reduced health harms, this kind of, like 27 different criteria. And then we found 4 quite broad policy regimes going from strict prohibition all the way to a very laissez-faire kind of free market approach. And for each one of those, we then took a substance like cannabis and we said, okay, so on this first criteria, which of these 4 regimes would be the best? And then we did that for all the 27 ones. And then afterwards, we had to balance those against each other because some of the concerns are more important than others. And based on that, we came up with what you see here, these pillars. So the higher the pillar, the better the policy satisfies the different things that we care about for drug policy. And for cannabis, these researchers found that a regulated state-controlled market would be the best option. The second analysis that I was involved in was a cost-benefit analysis, where I looked at how the harms of illegal markets in terms of resources and how many people are attracted into these markets and the harms they cause, how they're balanced against the harms of excessive use. And the conclusions there are that the harms of use, although they're there and they're significant and they imply that we should have a strict regulation and we should have taxation, they are not sufficient to justify a prohibition. But these 2 analyses are kind of like a large, sort of like a bird's eye view of the question because we still need to find out how to regulate. And there's a lot of different ways that can be done. And I'm pressing here and I'm not going forward, so let's see if we can get this to move. There we go. Okay. This is a very simple model of regulation. There's 3 parts here. There's production. Somebody has to make the stuff. Somebody has to get it out to the people who buy it. And then somebody has to use it. That's how these things work. So in production, we need to decide who's going to be allowed to produce. Is it going to be government? Is it going to be private cooperatives? Is it going to be individuals? What are they going to be allowed to produce? So for cannabis, are they going to be allowed to produce just plants, or are we talking edibles and extracts and wax and shatter and e-juices and edibles and lotions? What are we talking about? How are they going to be allowed to produce it? And how much are they going to be allowed to produce? Does every producer, are they allowed to grow as much as they want? What do they have to pay? Are we going to have licensing fees? Are we going to have quotas that only 10 people or 10 companies are allowed to do this? In terms of distribution, who's going to be allowed to sell it and what are they going to be allowed to sell? So for instance, in Norway we have alcohol regulation, but people cannot buy things that have more than, I think, 60% alcohol or something. You can't buy 95% proof alcohol in Norway because that's illegal. Then there's a question of how they're allowed to sell it. So in Norway we say only state licensed stores are allowed to sell alcohol with more than 4.5 alcohol percentage. And how much are they going to be allowed to sell and what do they have to pay to sell it? Finally, for consumption, we need to see who's going to be allowed to use it. Are we going to have age limits? Are certain groups, like if you have heroin-assisted treatment, you could say that that is a regulated form of heroin, but it's only available to people who have an established history of problematic drug use. How are they going to be allowed to use it? How much are they going to be allowed to use? And what are they going to have to pay for this? And in terms of cannabis, there's some researchers from the Rime Institute in the US, but this is a quite widely spread figure, where they put this on a spectrum. So here you have a repeal only of state prohibition. So basically you're saying that, okay, just sell it as if it's chewing gum, you know, whoever wants to produce it, whoever wants to sell it, go ahead. Over here you have keep the prohibition and increase the sanctions. And then in between you have a lot of graded different versions of regulated availability. And they call that the unexplored middle ground. And what I thought I would do today is to go through some of the examples we have from around the world of how those middle ground options, or what the actual implemented regulated options have been so far. And the first one is home growing, where it might be adults in general, or it might be medical users specifically that are allowed to grow. There might be limits on the number of plants you can have per person and per household. And it may or may not involve a register where you have to sign up with authorities to be licensed to have home growing. Typically there'll be no sales allowed, but you may allow gifts where you give someone this for a non-commercial transaction. And then you have questions such as, is driving going to be allowed? Are you going to have restrictions in terms of impaired driving and so on, which you'll typically will and should have. So this has been done in several places. One example in Canada now, when they legalize it, typically people are allowed to have 4 plants per person. In Uruguay, and we shall come back to, there's 6 plants per person. But they might also have more sort of nuanced ways of doing this. Like in Colorado, you can have 6 plants, but a maximum of 3 can be flowering at any time, and there's a maximum of 12 per household. In Washington State, only medical users are allowed to grow. And in Nevada, you have 6 per household if the retail sales outlets are closer than 40 kilometers. But if you're further away, you're allowed to have 12. And one of the benefits about this is that you have non-commercial but cumbersome access. So you kind of keep consumption low, or availability low, because there's an effort, there's a threshold you have to go past in order to set up and grow lights or whatever. And you can also have people who can grow specialized variants. There are people who believe that high CBD variants are conducive to health, or that it helps with their epilepsy. Or different people might have beliefs that different kinds of cannabis are what they want. We're going to hear more from Amir later today to what extent that lives up to its hype. But that's something some people would call a benefit. A challenge is that you have very limited monitoring of prevalence and the use patterns and the strength that people are actually having. And you might also need, and you can provide a cover for black market production, which was a big issue in Colorado, where the medical system allowed people to grow, I think it was up to 99 plants. So this became a way that people could say that, yeah, I'm just doing this for medical reasons, but actually you're producing it legally to ship it out of state or for your own state's black market. There's also risk of theft and fire. I mean, these grow lights can be pretty, not everyone takes the necessary precautions, and if you have a lot of highly valuable cannabis in your home, some people might try to get that. And you might also want to have a regulation of the market for equipment, such as grow lights and fertilizers, because there might be things in the fertilizers that are not necessarily good to get into your plants. A second option that has been tried in reality is so-called cannabis clubs, where the production and the distribution are combined into a club. It's typically supposed to be private, non-profit organizations that grow and sell cannabis to their members. It may involve a member registry, and you may have to send an application to the authority, or it may not. It's often the requirement is that it's supposed to be invitation only, so that you have to be invited by somebody who is already a member. So they're not going to be advertising to try and attract users. You're going to try to keep the commercialization down. And there might be limits to the quantities each member is allowed to get. Sometimes you'll also see that they want these venues where they have the social clubs to not be very sort of visible in terms of being like a coffee shop with with billboards and advertising and then branding, but it might be just a normal plain house front, and you have to know that this is actually what's inside this store. Some examples, there's these semi-legal or accepted cannabis social clubs in Spain, Belgium, and I've heard some people say they're also in Great Britain, although I'm not completely sure of how widespread that is. In Uruguay, they're part of the legal system of legal access. And again, one of the benefits with this is that it has a more non-commercial access for users. And you can also regulate it to a larger extent to provide health information and to have limitations on the amount of THC that you have in the plants that are for sale and so on. I also heard researchers mention that this could be a useful arena for harm reduction messages, because you know that these clubs, if they are in a register, you know where they are, you know that this is a place that the users have to come regularly, so this is a place where you can reach them if you have health information or surveys or in other ways get access to these people. But one of the challenges, especially insofar as they're semi-legal, is that it can slip into commercialization. You can have criminal involvement again, where they use this as a front for something more. And there can be a pretty superficial oversight of the products and the members. And this is something you can see in Barcelona. This is from the internet. If you can just Google it, "Can tourists buy weed in Barcelona?" And it says, well, in fact, most Barcelona weed clubs allow foreigners and tourists to join, which means that yes, absolutely, tourists can buy weed in Barcelona. The only condition is that you must know someone who is already a member of the club who can sponsor you for membership, but don't worry, we've got you covered. Just click the link below, and we will be glad to sponsor you, as we are members at many Barcelona cannabis stores. And the way this works is you just click off all the ones you want to try and apply for, and you write in your name, and then 5 minutes later you get invitations in your email, and you just show up, you give them a fee to become a member, and you can buy whatever you want in there. The Dutch model is sometimes seen as a fully legalized model, but it's not. It has this, that's why I put the red color on the production, because production is illegal for professional suppliers. If you're non-professional, if you're just a regular user, you can have up to 5 plants, but it has to be in a non-professional setup, and that will be tolerated. So it's not fully legal, but like the coffee shops, you're not going to be arrested for it. But the distribution is legally tolerated. In these coffee shops, there's a maximum of 5 grams per sale, and the coffee shops are supposed to never have more than 500 grams of cannabis on their premises. And there's also limits on the total number of coffee shops, where they're located, and who can shop there. Age limits is one thing, but over here they also tried to have there was a demand that you had to be a Dutch citizen, and that was not enforced in Amsterdam, because Amsterdam actually wants to have these tourists. But in the border regions, there's a lot of trouble with young people coming with cars from Belgium or Germany, and they're seen as a public nuisance. They come in, they don't spend money on anything, they just make a lot of noise and trouble and buy a lot of cannabis to bring back. On consumption, you have age limits and then the standard restrictions. What they say in the Netherlands is that this avoids the criminalization of users, which is seen as a good thing, and that it regulates the availability, and also that it sort of separates the markets between cannabis and other drugs. And finally, the fact that production is illegal is, I think, an important thing in understanding how the system works, because that is what keeps the prices high. Because you have to produce it in a legal way. You have to do inefficient production. You have to make sure you're not caught by the police. There's a risk that you'll be busted and lose all your supplies. And the police do enforce these things to some extent. Altogether, the model is successful in the sense that it avoids some of the harms of criminalization, while use prevalence tends to look pretty similar to the countries around. But there's limited product monitoring and testing. I think they did try to have like limits on the THC content, but there's no extensive, as far as I know, monitoring of THC content, sampling and testing in any public monitoring system. And there is this illegal and unregulated production, which is essential to the system at the same time as it's undesirable and is actively like the police is actively trying to stop it.
And I just tell you that 10 cities are now going to allow legal production in the Netherlands.
Yes, that's Dutch model version 2. We tested in 10 cities.
Okay.
And that is really interesting, because that is actually now I guess that would be the first government-run supply chain for cannabis. As far as I understand, it's the government that is supposed to be supplying this. So it's 10 cities that have opted to be part of the system, but the big cities like Amsterdam, they did not want to be part of this. I think partially, the argument was that they had to agree that only the government cannabis was going to be offered for sale in the coffee shops, and they did not think that it would be possible in terms of the amount they needed or the quality variations that people would want. The Uruguay model. Uruguay was the first country to legalize this at a national level. And their goals were to reduce drug trafficking related violence by taking the marijuana off the black market. And in the West, that's typically not seen as a major thing in cannabis markets. Cannabis markets tend to be less violent than some of the other drug markets. Promoting public health through education and prevention programs, and eliminating the existing legal paradox that allowed for possession but didn't really have any avenue for legally accessing cannabis, even though you were allowed to have it and use it under the decriminalization regime. So there's 3 ways you can get cannabis if you want to get the legal cannabis in Uruguay. First of all, you have to be from Uruguay. Tourists are not part of the system in any way. You can get home growing, 6 plants. You can be a member of a cannabis social club. The clubs have from 15 to 45 members, and they can sell a maximum of 480 grams per year to a member. Or you can buy from a pharmacy where they use a system with fingerprint scanners, and where you can buy a maximum of 10 grams per week. And there's 4 strains. There's no high THC variant. They say that they're trying to aim for something that has a balanced sort of ratio between THC and CBD. So far there seems to be 2 producers. It's a bit difficult to get details on how this is going. But this was from earlier this year, where it said that 2 producers were currently licensed and more may be on the way. Now, all 3 options require you to be registered. And currently, or again, this is from earlier this year, there were 8,750 people who were registered home growers, 2,529 members in 90 cannabis clubs, and 24,117 that were registered with pharmacies. But there is an estimated number of users at 147,000, which means that a lot of the current users of cannabis in Uruguay have not currently chosen to take part of the legal system. Some of that may be due to this requirement that you have to be registered in a government sort of list. There's also some gradual implementation challenges. By 2019, there were only 17 pharmacies that were participating in this. And one of the reasons is that there's banking pressure, especially from American banks. The US banks do not want to have their systems used for cannabis sales for legal reasons. And also, when it came to currently it's like, I think, as far as I understand, I think you have to pay in cash in the pharmacies. And there's only one of the 2 licensed producers that pass quality controls at some points, leading to a very an undersupply of people having to stand in line to get cannabis from those licensed pharmacies that were there. Turning to the US is a mess. It's a patchwork, and they call it, the states are a laboratory of democracy where you can try and implement different models. So you have in these states where the typically liberal states where Hillary Clinton won, here you have adult recreational use allowed. The medical use is much more sort of accepted. Some states they only allow CBD variants, and then there's the gray ones in where nothing is allowed. These are often set by ballot initiatives, which means that it's a very different form of legislation that is involved. It's people who say that, hey, we have a good idea, let's regulate like alcohol, let's write down these things that we think should be done, and then we get a lot of signatures and we'll get people to vote on it. And when that passes, that becomes law. So the state cannot say, well, okay, we'll legalize it, but we want it to have a much more sophisticated and stringent regulation model. You can't do that because they have to implement the ballot initiative because that's what's passed into law. Now the first place that did this was Colorado and Washington State, where it's been legal since 2012-13. They have retail sales outlets. In Washington, you're not allowed to have any home growing, as we saw, that you were allowed to have that in Colorado. In Colorado, they've also been shaped in different ways so that there's more vertical integration in Colorado. What vertical integration means is that it's the same company that grows it, distributes it, and sells it. It's the same system, and that means that they can, to a larger extent, keep prices high, for instance, because they have more brand awareness. You come to their store, they want to sell their own products, and they're not going to sell those anywhere else. Whereas in Washington, a person selling this cannabis from a retail store will source cannabis from different people, and you will have more of a sort of price competition. In Washington, D.C., it's been legal since 2015, where you can possess up to 57 grams. You're allowed to home grow, but you're not allowed to sell it, which has led to, you're allowed to gift it, which these absurd things, like there was some place where they tried to say that, buy this t-shirt for $70 and we'll give you a gift of cannabis. Vermont legalized this through the political process. They allow home growing of 2 mature plants, 28 grams per possession, but no sales. And there's large variation also in the tax levels. There's more states that have come to over time, but the tax levels can range from 12% to 47% by some estimates. So there's a lot of variation. And also the taxes are often set on the value of the good. So then it's a $10 good and you have 20% taxation, then there's $2 added to the price. The problem with that is that legal production is a lot cheaper than illegal production. So the prices are dropping, and that means the tax revenues are dropping as well. Also, there's federal prohibition, so there's no access to bank services, there's no state outlets, you can't have like a state monopoly like we have. I put a question mark there because I saw a report once that said there was 1 state outlets in 1 state. I'm not sure how that worked. There's often the limited regulatory options, like I mentioned, and there's often substantial variation within the state. So even though a state is legalized, that doesn't mean there's going to be retail stores everywhere in that state, because the municipalities at the local level can decide whether or not they want to participate and allow this kind of system. So half of all municipalities in Colorado do not allow retail sales. So some of the concerns about the US model is that, well, it has product control, and it's a system where they say they're sort of like developing techniques as they go along because they don't really know what the issues are because no one's done this before. They have low production costs and efficient operation compared to the illegal market. They have product innovation. You can see that as a benefit. Some people might even see it as a harm. You get edibles, you get vape pens, lotions. These are products that to consumers may be more desirable. They may have lower risk or they may not. The drawbacks, you have limited oversight and regulation due to federal prohibition. And we saw that now recently where there was a number of people dying from lung disease after having purchased THC vape pens, partly illegally, but in some cases from legal sources that contained, apparently, this is not my field, but apparently it has to do with the use of vitamin E derived oils in the solution that you, THC is a fat soluble molecule. And if this had been allowed at a sort of national level, it would have been easier to have someone like Food and Drug Administration actually monitor these things in a more good manner. You also have marketing and lifestyle branding promoting use, and the private businesses have an incentive to target and grow the pathological tail of the use distribution. It's the little group of people that use a lot of the cannabis. So in Denmark, there was an estimate that said that the top group of users, they can use like more than 1.3 kilos per year. And if the low volume users smoke like 3 or 4 joints a year, you're going to have more than 1,000 of those before you get up to the volume of 1 major user. They're also developing stronger and more intensive usage forms such as dabbing, and there's a shift towards lower prices that lowers the tax revenue. And finally, you have a problem with the cross-state issues with tax competition between the states and people smuggling into illegal areas. And here's a graph of the price drop in Colorado, 70% in 4 years. And here's an example of how you see these health benefits that are touted, and I would guess that these are far ahead of any evidence available. It's supposed to just promote wellness. You can give it to your dog. The Canadian model, and I'll try to be quick now since I'm getting close to the end of my talk, but you can have up to 30 grams per session. You can have home growing up to 4 plants, but there are 2 provinces that did not allow this. And in one province you're allowed, but you can't have it in a way that's visible to anyone from the outside, because then you'll get a $5,000 fine. There's also, kind of like in the US, there's a patchwork. There's different policies in the different provinces. You have different sales channels. Some will allow mail order, which is available everywhere, sometimes run by the government, in some places run by private operators. They might also decide on whether to allow retail outlets and what kind of retail outlets they will allow. So there's 17 private retail outlets in Alberta. In Newfoundland and Labrador, you have state-owned outlets. But also the problem there is that they try to have these licensing fees, and in some places they have a quite substantial amount of people who were allowed to sell from dispensaries and retail outlets before the legalization, and that haven't been able to pay the fees to enter and are still operating, so you have this sort of dual system that is a bit weird. They're trying to have standardized boring packaging with clear marketing and product info. And they have rules on the marketing. So they are allowed to have advertisements, but you're not allowed to have lifestyle advertisements, mascots, and celebrity, and not where young people are exposed. And they're also doing a gradual phasing of products. So in the beginning, they only allowed the flower tops, and now they're going to start introducing other products like edibles. But they're much more careful and cautious in the way they roll this out. So to end with, I'm just going to show you this that I just took from Wikipedia, and that I guess none of you will be able to read. But the point here is that you have the different provinces, and you can see that, for instance, minimum age for use, some places it's 18, mostly it's 19. Allowed growing at home for personal use only, yes. Cannot be visible from public space, yes, if you have a medical license. And also some places, no. The home storage limit can be unlimited, 1,000 grams, 150 grams. The number of plants per household is 4 maximum, it seems, and some places not permitted. Allow use in public, only where tobacco is allowed, or there could be a ban close to playgrounds or places where kids are, or that you're allowed to use it on trails, highways, streets, roads, and parks when they're not in use for public use. So you have all these different things that they're operating. And in one sense, that would be good if we could use that to sort of see how outcomes vary as a function of this. But that may or may not be possible. It depends on how this was set up. So that's what I had to say. Thank you, and time will show whether this works.